In 1890, a man named Jean-Baptiste Pon was growing vegetables on a plot of land smaller than most American backyards. No tractor, no irrigation system, no bank loan, no farm equipment beyond a wheelbarrow and a few hand tools. And he was making the equivalent of a six-figure income, not from hundreds of acres, not from a commercial greenhouse operation, from roughly 1.5 acres of hand-tended garden beds on the outskirts of Paris. When researchers began documenting these growers in the late 1800s, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Yields per square foot that exceeded anything modern farming equipment would achieve a century later. Year-round production in a climate that should have made that impossible. Soil so alive, so deep, and so rich that it was generating heat in the dead of winter, warming the roots of crops that had no right to be growing in January. And then, within a single generation, the entire system disappeared. Not because it failed, not because something better replaced it. It disappeared because something cheaper replaced it. Something that worked at scale. Something that fed cities but impoverished the farmers doing the feeding. Today, we're going to rebuild that system. By the time this video is over, you'll understand exactly how the Paris market gardeners turned small plots of ordinary city fringe land into engines of perpetual income, and how you can do the same thing on a quarter acre starting this season. But first, you need to understand what was lost and why. Paris in the 1800s had a problem that modern cities have forgotten. The city needed fresh vegetables every single day for millions of people. And there were no refrigerated trucks, no cold storage supply chains, no imported produce from distant states. What the city ate had to be grown close enough to arrive at market the same morning it was harvested. The men and women who solved this problem were called le maraîchers, the Paris market gardeners. They occupied a ring of land just outside the city walls, small plots ranging from half an acre to 2 or 3 acres. The land wasn't particularly special. The climate wasn't forgiving. Paris winters are cold, gray, and long. What was special was the method. The maraîchers had spent generations learning one specific lesson. When land is limited, you don't optimize for convenience. You optimize for output per square foot. Every inch of soil either earned money or it didn't. Idle ground was a financial liability. They treated their beds the way a merchant treats shelf space. Every square foot had to be producing something at all times. To accomplish this, they built a system with 4 interlocking parts: deep soil preparation, constant succession planting, season extension with glass and compost heat, and direct-to-market selling that cut out every middleman. By the 1880s, the best Paris market gardeners were harvesting year-round, coaxing 2 or 3 full crop rotations out of a single bed in a single year. Some maintained waiting lists of wealthy Parisian households who paid premium prices for the privilege of a weekly basket. And then the 20th century arrived. Tractors arrived. Chemical nitrogen fertilizer arrived. The entire logic of agriculture shifted from output per square foot to output per labor hour. Wide rows made sense if a machine was passing through them. Deep, hand-tilled beds made no sense if a plow could do in an hour what took a gardener a week. The French intensive system wasn't disproven. It was simply incompatible with a new industrial mindset. It was abandoned, not in a dramatic moment, but gradually as the men who knew it aged and died, and nobody thought to write it down seriously until it was nearly gone. In the 1970s, an American researcher named John Jeavons began excavating what was left of that knowledge. He traveled to France, interviewed elderly gardeners, studied the old documentation, and brought the method back to Northern California to test it rigorously. What he found confirmed everything the old records suggested. French intensive beds produced 4 times the food of conventional garden rows. The soil improved every year rather than depleting. The labor was intense, but the return on that labor, measured in dollars per hour, was extraordinary. His work is now published. The research exists, and yet, Most gardeners in America have never heard of this system because the industrial agriculture industry, valued at hundreds of billions annually, has no incentive to tell you that your backyard can replace your grocery bill. Most people who grow vegetables do what they were taught. Till a row, plant seeds. Walk between the rows to weed and harvest. Wait, harvest, till again next season. That system was designed around one constraint: the width of a horse and later a tractor. The French intensive system was designed around a completely different constraint: the reach of a human arm. Narrow beds never compacted. A bed is never wider than you can comfortably reach from either side, typically 30 to 48 inches. You never step into the bed ever, because every time you compress that soil with your body weight, you undo weeks of biological work. The soil structure collapses. The air pockets close. Roots have to fight to move through it. Instead, you work only from the edges. The bed stays loose, airy, and alive. Deep preparation, the double dig. Before planting, the soil is worked to a depth of 24 inches or more. Not 6 inches like a typical tiller. Not 12 inches. 24. Done by hand with a technique called double digging. You remove the top 12 inches of soil, loosen the subsoil beneath it, then return the topsoil enriched with massive quantities of compost. The result is not soil, it's a sponge. Water moves through it perfectly. Roots drive down easily. The biology explodes. A carrot that would take 90 days in ordinary ground can reach maturity in 60. A lettuce head that would be modest in a typical bed becomes dense, large, and market-ready faster than any seed packet would predict. This depth is what separates decorative gardens from income-generating ones. High-density hexagonal planting. In a conventional row garden, plants are spaced to give each one room to grow without interference. 12 inches between lettuce heads, 8 inches between beet plants. It seems logical until you realize that the space between those plants is growing nothing. French intensive plants crops in a hexagonal pattern, offset rows. So each plant sits in the gap between the two plants ahead of it. When mature, the leaves of neighboring plants just barely touch. This shades the soil between plants, suppressing weeds without chemicals and retaining moisture without irrigation, and it maximizes productive plants per square foot. A bed planted this way can hold 30 to 50% more plants than a conventional row garden of the same size. Every additional plant is additional income, succession planting, the engine of continuous income. Here is where most gardeners leave the most money on the table. They plant a bed in spring. They harvest in summer. The bed sits empty through fall. That empty bed is not neutral. It's costing you money. Land you own, soil you've built, location you've secured, producing nothing. The Paris market gardeners had a rule. A bed is never empty. The moment one crop comes out, another goes in. Not eventually, that day. They achieved this through meticulous planning, staggering plantings, so that as radish is finished, a flat of lettuce seedlings was already 4 weeks old and waiting. As lettuce finished, carrot seed was ready to sow. As carrots came out in fall, a cover crop went in to protect the soil through winter. A single 100 square foot bed managed this way might produce 5 or 6 distinct crops per year. Compare that to the typical garden's 1 or 2. The economics are simple. If a bed with 1 crop per year earns $200 in produce, the same bed with 4 successions earns $800. Land cost identical, soil cost identical. Only the planning changes. Soil as the engine, the real secret. None of this works without the soil. The Paris market gardeners had access to something that powered the entire system, the horse manure of Paris itself. In the 1800s, the city had tens of thousands of horses. Their manure had to go somewhere. The maraîchers paid to receive it. They composted it in deep beds between their growing plots, mixing it with straw and organic waste until it transformed into something that was half compost, half heat generator. Fresh horse manure composts hot. 120, 130, 140 degrees Fahrenheit in the center of a good pile. The market gardeners used that heat. Glass bell jars called cloches or cold frames made from old window glass were placed over early plantings. Underneath, the decomposing manure warmed the soil. Above, the glass trapped the sun. Inside this microclimate, plants grew in February that had no right to exist in February. Early crops meant first-to-market status. First to market meant the highest prices of the season before supply caught up with demand. A gardener who could offer fresh lettuce in March while everyone else waited for May wasn't just selling lettuce, they were selling scarcity. Today, you don't need horse manure from Parisian stables. You need compost. Deep, rich, biological compost built from kitchen scraps, yard waste, and any animal manure you can source locally. The principle is identical. You build the soil first, and the soil produces the income. This is the part nobody in the agriculture industry wants you to think about too carefully. The French intensive system was not proven wrong. No researcher discredited it. No crop failure condemned it. It was simply inconvenient for the direction 20th century agriculture wanted to go. Industrial agriculture optimizes for one thing: output per acre at continental scale. To do that, you need machines. To use machines, you need wide rows. To fertilize wide rows cheaply, you use synthetic nitrogen. To control weeds in wide rows, you use herbicides. Every one of those choices makes the French intensive system look inefficient if your goal is continental scale production. But if your goal is income from a quarter acre, the logic completely inverts. Industrial agriculture earns pennies per pound on commodity crops because everyone is growing the same thing at the same time for the same buyers. French intensive produces premium crops, sold fresh, sold locally, sold directly to customers who are paying for quality they cannot get from a grocery store. A pound of supermarket lettuce earns the farmer maybe 15 cents after costs. A head of beautiful same-day harvested variety-specific lettuce sold at a farmer's market commands $2 to $4. Same crop, same soil, completely different financial reality. The system wasn't replaced because it failed the farmer. It was replaced because it was incompatible with a food system designed to make farmers dependent on input companies, shipping companies, and retail chains. Once you understand that, rebuilding the system on your own land feels less like a hobby and more like an act of financial intelligence. Let's be specific. Land. A quarter acre is more than enough. Many successful growers work on far less. The Paris gardeners making six-figure equivalents were working 1 to 2 acres full-time before modern seed breeding improved yields. A quarter acre intensively managed is a serious income source. Tools. No tractors, no tillers. A good spade, a broad fork for deep aeration, a hand rake, a soil blocker for starting transplants, and a hori-hori knife for transplanting. Total $150 to $300 for quality tools that will last decades. Compost. Your primary ongoing input and your primary competitive advantage. Start building your compost system before anything else. Run 3 bins in rotation. 1 actively building, 1 maturing, 1 finished. Source materials from your kitchen, your yard, and any local farms, stables, or food businesses willing to divert their organic waste. Seeds. Focus on high-value crops with short days to maturity. Salad greens, radishes, turnips, spinach, carrots, beets, herbs, and edible flowers for the premium market. First-year seed investment for a quarter acre. $100 to $200. Season extension. Cold frames from salvaged old windows. Row cover fabric for frost protection. These are not expensive. They are what separates a 6-month growing season from a 10-month one. Total startup cost. Roughly $500 to $800. Compare that to any other income-generating venture at this price point, and the return on investment ratio is extraordinary. Step 1. Lay out your beds. Each bed should be no wider than 4 feet, as long as your space allows, typically 20 to 30 feet per bed. Leave 18-inch pathways between beds. The paths are for you. The beds are for plants. On a quarter acre, you can fit 15 to 25 serious production beds. That is your production footprint. Step 2. Double dig. This is the work. It is not light work, but you do it once per bed. Then maintain rather than repeat. Remove the top 12 inches of soil. Loosen the next 12 inches with a fork. Add compost to the lower layer. Return the topsoil with more compost mixed in. The bed should now sit several inches above the surrounding pathways. That is your soil sponge. In subsequent years, you only add compost to the surface and let earthworms and biology incorporate it downward. Step 3. Start small. Do not build 25 beds in year 1. Build 5. Learn the succession timing. Learn your local market. Learn which crops sell and which site. Then expand. The Paris gardeners spent years mastering their craft before maximizing their plots. The biology and the business model both reward patience and observation. Step 4. Plant in succession from day 1. Think in weeks, not seasons. Plant a bed of radishes ready in 25 to 30 days. 3 weeks after that, start lettuce indoors. When the radishes come out, the lettuce goes in at exactly the right transplant size. 4 weeks before the lettuce finishes, sow carrots so they're ready when you need that space. Within 1 season, this sequencing becomes second nature. Let's talk numbers directly. A single 100 square foot French intensive bed, managed with succession planting, can produce between $300 and $600 worth of market value produce per year. That is a conservative estimate based on farmers' market pricing in mid-size American cities. In coastal markets, the numbers run higher. 20 beds comfortably manageable on a quarter acre could generate $6,000 to $12,000 in produce value annually. There are 2 ways to capture that value: grow for your family and replace grocery purchases dollar for dollar, or sell. If you sell, the most profitable channel is always direct. Farmers markets, CSA subscriptions, restaurant accounts, or neighborhood buying groups. Every middleman you add costs you margin. The Paris gardeners understood this. They did not sell to wholesalers. They sold to the households and restaurants willing to pay for what wholesale couldn't provide. A CSA model is particularly aligned with the French intensive approach. You sell 20 to 30 families a weekly box of produce at the beginning of the season before you've grown anything. They pay up front. You grow to order. Income arrives before expenses do. 20 CSA members at $30 per week for 22 weeks is $13,200 from a quarter acre. That is not theoretical. That is documented reality from growers operating right now in every region of the country. Here is what separates a productive market garden from a hobby that never generates real income. The hobby gardener thinks in crops. The market gardener thinks in systems. A hobby gardener asks, "What should I plant this spring?" A market gardener asks, "What will this bed be producing every week from March through November? What does each crop need to have already been started before the previous one is harvested? And which crops are commanding the best prices right now in my local market?" The difference is not effort. Both gardeners work. The difference is planning density. How many decisions get made in advance? How much of the season's income is locked in before the first seed goes into the ground? The Paris market gardeners kept meticulous records. They tracked which beds produced what, which successions worked seamlessly, which crops commanded the best prices at which times of year. They were not romantics. They were small business operators who happened to work in soil. If you approach this as a business with a planting calendar, a marketing plan, and a commitment to understanding your local customer, a quarter acre is not a hobby. It is an income source that improves every year as your soil deepens and your skills compound. Sit with this for a moment. The French intensive system was generating 6-figure incomes from small plots in a city with no Amazon delivery, no refrigeration, no synthetic fertilizer, and no power tools. With hand labor, with horse manure, with glass jars turned upside down over seedlings in February. The inputs were simple. The biology was understood. The market was direct and local. The income was real. Everything that replaced it, the tractors, the chemicals, the commodity pricing, the consolidated grocery chains, optimized for scale and convenience, not for the farmer, but for the system that sells to the farmer and buys from the farmer and profits on both ends. Most American families now spend $10,000 to $15,000 per year on food. Much of that goes to packaging, shipping, retail markup, and corporate margins held by companies with no relationship to the land that grew what you're eating. A functioning French-intensive garden, even one that covers only your family's needs without selling a single vegetable, can displace thousands of dollars of annual spending. One that sells a fraction of its output generates meaningful supplemental income. One managed as a full operation on a quarter acre can produce a primary income in the right market. But beyond the money, there is something else. Something the maraîchers understood, and that Javens documented, and that every serious practitioner of this method eventually experiences. When your soil is genuinely alive, biologically rich, deep, and dark, growing things in it feels different. The plants respond visibly. Growth rates are faster than they should logically be. The flavor of what you grow bears no resemblance to what comes wrapped in plastic from a warehouse somewhere. You are not fighting the land. You are partnering with it. Year 1, you are building. Year 2, you are learning. Year 3, you are producing seriously. Year 5, you have a quarter acre that has become, through careful stewardship, a genuinely extraordinary piece of ground capable of producing more food per square foot than almost any farming system in the world, with no dependence on inputs you don't control, no supply chain that can fail you, no commodity price that can ruin you. 10 years from now, food prices will be higher. Supply chains will have had more disruptions. More families will be anxious about what grocery store inflation means for their monthly budget. You will walk out to your beds in the early morning, pick a basket of greens that were in the ground an hour ago, and understand in a way that is hard to put into words why the Paris market gardeners guarded this knowledge so carefully and passed it down so deliberately for over 2 centuries. This is not a hobby. This is not a trend. This is a system that was set aside not because it failed, but because it made the farmer independent, and independent farmers don't need to buy what industrial agriculture is selling. The knowledge has always been here. The ground beneath your feet is waiting. The information is here. The system works. The only thing left is to start digging. If this story changes how you look at the soil beneath your feet, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the history and the systems that they tried to bury. Grow your own independence and plant the seeds for a better future. The next treasure of knowledge will be revealed soon.